Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me introduce the first panel of the 5th year of Conservative Summit. The name of this panel is How to Return to the Spiritual and Cultural Foundation of Europe. The aim of this panel is to seek the causes of the crisis of European identity, and at the same time, we want to search for the ways to overcome this crisis. I'm very pleased to introduce the panelists. First, His Eminence Archbishop Cyril Vasil, Greek Catholic Archbishop, who is currently also the Eparchial Bishop of the Košice Eparchy. In the following years, he held several important positions, including that of Dean of the Faculty of Eastern Ecclesial Law and Rector of the Pontifical Oriental Institute. He was also appointed Secretary of the Congregation for the Oriental Churches. Please welcome him. The second panelist is Father Benedict Kiely. He is a Catholic priest incarnated in the personal ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham. Born in London, he has spent most of his priestly ministry in the United States. He is a founder of Nazarene Charity, and with the permission and support of his ordinary, he divides his time between the US, UK, and the Middle East, speaking, preaching, and writing, trying to focus attention on the plight of persecuted Christians around the world. Please welcome. The third panelist is Titus Teixeira. He's an editor for the Logos Initiative and teaches politics in the Manhattan Institute Logos Fellowship. He's a cultural critic writing for American think tanks, including Liberty Fund, the Acton Institute, the Claremont Institute, and others. He also is the executive director of the American Cinema Foundation, host of ACF movie podcast, and he lectures on cinema in universities across America. Welcome. And finally, Professor Richard Legutko is a professor of philosophy at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. In 2005, he was elected to a seat in the Polish Senate, where he became deputy speaker. In 2007, he was Poland's education minister and later Secretary of State in the Chancellery of President Lech Kaczynski. He was a member of the European Parliament and co-chairman of Conservative and Reformist Parliamentary Group. Welcome. And without further ado, let's move to first introductory lecture. Father Benedict Kiely will open this panel with his lecture about the roots and remedies of current crisis. Father Benedict, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juraj. Once again, I express my gratitude to the Ladislav Hannes Institute and all those who have worked so hard for this conference, and thank you for inviting me to speak both yesterday and today, twice yesterday and twice today. It's a joy to be in Slovakia for the first time, and this beautiful city of Bratislava, so rich in history and culture, where all the buildings speak of a high age of European culture, a culture which is indeed in crisis, but like an old or even severely damaged building, can be restored to its former beauty and glory. The work of restoration, as any architect or builder, or even if you own an old house, will know, is painstaking, laborious, and not only requires great energy, patience, and skill, but two other qualities or virtues, we might say, courage and love. I'm at a slight disadvantage, or if you were here yesterday for the law conference, you might be at an even greater disadvantage, because I was asked to speak yesterday on a very similar topic with an introductory talk, short talk, and asked to address the same issues with this slightly longer talk. So I'll obviously repeat myself somewhat, although in more depth. So if you were here yesterday, imagine that you're dreaming a half-remembered dream. It's not a nightmare, I hope. Or if you're here today only, there'll be no déjà vu. It's all new. I thought, unlike yesterday, it would be better to focus principally on some ways or choices we could make to emerge from the crisis of culture in Europe positively, and practical ways to address the title of this panel, How to Return to the Spiritual and Cultural Foundations of Europe. As a thought to hold on to, which I'll return to at the end, I'd like to read a short verse from Scripture, from the Old Testament, from the book of Maccabees. Judas Maccabeus, the warrior of Israel, has a very small army facing the huge army of the Syrians. His men are afraid and declare that with such small numbers, it will be impossible to defeat the Syrians. Judas Maccabeus addresses them, and these are his words. It is not on the size of the army that victory in battle depends, but strength comes from heaven. They come against us in great pride and lawlessness, to destroy us and our wives and our children, and to despoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. He himself will crush them before us. As for you, do not be afraid of them. Before the good news, as one preacher once said, there must be bad news, otherwise there's no news. Briefly addressing, again, some of the causes of the crisis, as yesterday, I posit a few trajectories which charted the course leading to where we are now. And once again, with no insult to my devout Protestant brothers and sisters, I spoke yesterday about this, and I'm not being patronizing. Often, especially, for example, when I've been in Iraq, that old story of the ecumenism of blood is so much more important. When ISIS come to chop your head off, they don't ask if you're Protestant or Catholic or Syriac Orthodox. They ask, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And so there is an ecumenism of blood eventually if we are all believers in Jesus Christ. But so no insult to my Protestant brothers and sisters. However, the massive break, the tsunami of change in Europe brought about by the Reformation, unleashed forces probably never imagined by the likes of Luther or Zwingli or others. Henry VIII in Britain broke a profoundly Catholic culture, although it probably took 2 generations to be fully realized, always with a few loyal Catholics who braved dungeon, fire, and sword to stay faithful to the ancient religion. Religion, as we know, etymologically means to bind together. So logically, an unbinding or a break of a people with the faith that has formed their culture, both as individual nations and as the continent of Europe, will have profound and quite possibly existential consequences. That unbinding, breaking of bonds way below the surface of things, through the so-called Enlightenment, the French Revolution and regicide, eventually and inevitably led to increasing secularization and atheism, culminating in the horrors of Nazism and communism, which you in Central and Eastern Europe know so well. From all this, we come to a Europe which calls the killing of babies both a right and a choice, and the Nazi euthanasia policies exterminating the old, the sick, even the depressed, called death with dignity. Within the church, too, I'm afraid, this secularization and breaking of bonds has led to a crisis of faith, far more serious, for example, than battles over the old Mass, although that's part of it. Speaking the truth in love, caritas in veritate, from St. Paul and the motto of Pope Benedict XVI, a man who truly understood and addressed the causes of the crisis in Western civilization. Speaking the truth in love demands honesty and transparency, and indeed humility, to acknowledge failures and to find ways to repair and rebuild. Someone, I don't know who, famously said that at the very moment the church threw open the windows in the 1960s to allegedly let in the fresh air, was the very moment when the air was turning foul and putrid. Even now, preparing for this conference, I read in the latest document of the Italian Synodal Assembly. That doesn't sound very nice. The Italian Synodal Assembly were pursuing a pro-LGBT and gay pride agenda, bringing Italy into what the author called the German-Belgian Synodal Axis. Again, sounds rather unpleasant. Reflecting, the author's words, wider European trends towards ecclesial reconciliation with secular liberalism. The spirit of the Soixante-Huitards, the rebels of 1968, who so shocked both the young Father Ratzinger and another conservative prophet, Roger Scruton, is alive and well, or rather festering, still in the generation, a very white-haired generation, who still think that the tried and failed agenda, which emptied the churches, lost 3 generations with poor catechesis, and brings no life, will, like a bleary-eyed, tie-dyed wearing hippie phoenix, emerge from the ashes of the fire which it created. Ecclesial reconciliation with secular liberalism. What madness is this? It's like 2 terminally ill people, both barren, marrying in the hope of producing healthy children. Suicidal madness. That's the bad news. And now our title, How to Return to the Spiritual and Cultural Foundations of Europe. I like that title and the order of words. The spiritual comes before the cultural, or as I said yesterday, culture is downstream from religion and politics from culture. And to return or to restore, using that image of a damaged house. Also in the restoring of a house, it's the foundations which must first be secured and stabilized. The foundation is the faith, or as Hilaire Belloc said, the faith is Europe and Europe is the faith. No greater example can be given than the debate, which many of us will remember, over the European Constitution. As St. John Paul II spoke so eloquently at the time, the refusal to acknowledge the Christian foundation of Europe was not only a denial of reality, but an attack on memory, something the communists practiced so effectively and is used by all despots and totalitarians, including the Islamists. Memory is foundational. Roots, from whence we get the word radical. We need in every sphere, starting with the spiritual, flowing into culture and politics, to be radical, to return and remember, and then restore our roots. To take one example, not our building analogy, but real buildings, the restoration of beautiful and traditional houses and buildings in town centers, and tearing down the ugly monstrosities created after the war. In the sphere of politics, downstream from the culture, it must be the work of Christian Catholic politicians to run on a platform of restoration and the revival of memory, faith, family, nation. From these 3 foundations, the culture will be restored, renewed, and rescued. The faith. The great Catholic historian Christopher Dawson wrote these words, which I would say are programmatic and practical, which is what we want, not just abstract theories. Dawson wrote, "Christian culture was essentially a sacramental culture, which embodied religious truth in visible and palpable forms. Art, architecture, music and poetry and drama, philosophy and history were used as channels for the communication of religious truth. Today, those channels have been closed by unbelief and choked by ignorance. That last sentence is very important. Today, he writes, I think he was writing just after the war, these channels, as he called them, the conduits through which Christian culture was transmitted, have been closed by unbelief and choked by ignorance. Did I mention that the work of restoration demands patience, hard work, and courage and love? The closure by unbelief is and was deliberate, both from the forces of the left and the result of aggressive secularism. The choking of ignorance is a byproduct of policy and education, or rather lack of education, but it is something that can be aggressively and creatively combated. When someone has something stuck in their throat and they are choking, the Heimlich maneuver is employed, somewhat violently expelling the object which would otherwise kill them. All the cultural forces, spearheaded with the full-bodied support of the Church, must perform an educational Heimlich maneuver on choking ignorance of an amnesiac European culture. The good news is that this is being done in schools, new universities, parishes, and some dioceses led by creative, orthodox, and intelligent bishops, which isn't an oxymoron. This conference and the work of so many institutes in the lands formerly oppressed by communism is another example. Lastly, as a Catholic priest, not a politician, I'd suggest two other ways we can reclaim, restore, rebuild the spiritual and cultural foundations of Europe, one of which I've already alluded to. Secular and atheistic culture, the long final destination of the rupture of the 16th century, has created a desacramentalized world, a world which has lost its sense of enchantment. Yet, as the Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins once wrote, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. The secular city, both deliberately as under communism or as a result of the withdrawal of the faith, is empty, a vacuum. From the church, first and foremost, then flowing through all those channels Dawson described, must come the reminder of God's grandeur, his presence, seen not only in sacramental form, but then, as Dawson said, in a sacramental culture which embodies religious truth. The truth of the faith is, as he said, in visible and palpable forms: art, architecture, music, poetry, etc. As in the time of Nazism and communism, the young Karol Wojtyła organized secret cultural gatherings, plays and poetry readings. As in this country, in what is now the Czech Republic, similar things occurred. Small actions have great consequences. But the church must comprehend the need to lead in this renewal. It's not business as usual. It's not ecclesial reconciliation with secular liberalism, but being the source and the spring of beauty, truth, and goodness. We're in a unique moment. Anecdotal and statistical evidence is showing that young people are seeking an alternative to all that the secular city has promised. In the church, the liturgy, the sacramental life, an encounter with the beauty of the divine will then come the ability to see the world charged with the grandeur of God. More than that, from the encounter will come the ability to see the dignity of man, made in the image and likeness of God, which will create a culture of life, and the practical and charitable response to the culture of death. A sacramental and enchanted vision of life, which is both local and national. Maisie Ward, the biographer of G.K. Chesterton, once wrote in the introduction of a book called The English Way, published in 1933, her words that Christianity is the religion of the incarnation of Godhead in humanity, of the absolute in the relative, of eternity in time. Because it is universal, it is in every country, but because it is sacramental, it is intensely local, found in each country in a special and unique fashion, not a spirit only, but a spirit clothed in material form. A spirit clothed in material form. Not for us, friends, what has been called beige Catholicism, not the bland leading the bland, but the beauty and local sacramentality of Bavarian Catholicism, Polish Catholicism, Spanish, yes, even English Catholicism. A sacramental vision will answer this small revival that is appearing and will restore, reclaim, and rebuild the culture. In conclusion, a final and personal way we can all individually restore, rebuild, and reclaim the spiritual and cultural foundation of Europe. Be truly human, which means becoming a saint. The German spiritual writer Ida Friederike Görres, who died in the 70s and who Father Ratzinger eulogized at her funeral, wrote some extraordinary words which I read recently. She's been called by the wise Bishop of Trondheim, Bishop Erik Varden, a crucial voice for the present moment. She wrote, "The saint is the most important person in the world because the saint is the decisive answer to the big riddle, what is a human being? The saint is the terrifying statement, humans are sanctificabilis, able to become holy. This is not pious talk or a homily. The big riddle of our time, as Görres correctly suggests, what is a human being, is answered by the saint. A man or woman transformed by the grace of Christ through the life of the sacraments, forming a family without which, as Chesterton said, we are helpless before the state, becoming a citizen of a nation transforms the culture. We have the answer to the big riddle, which will not only save Europe, but humanity. But don't forget the words I started with of Judas Maccabeus. It is not the size of the army that victory in battle depends, but strength comes from heaven. They come against us in great pride and lawlessness to destroy us and our wives and our children and to despoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. He himself will crush them before us. And as for you, do not be afraid of them. Thank you.
Wow, like a courageous and excellent lecture. I'm looking forward to discussion. I will ask the remaining three panelists to comment shortly on what we heard now, and I will add to each of them one small question from my side. And I will start with Archbishop Cyril Vasil. Ak dovolíte, otec arcibiskup, tak skúsim vám položiť tú druhú otázku po slovensky. Teda najskôr vás poprosím, aby ste dali krátky komentár k tomu, čo sme práve počuli. A moja otázka je,
if you allow me, our dear Archbishop, I'd like to address you with the second question in Slovak. So first, please give us a short commentary to what we heard. And my question is, how do you perceive, to maybe elaborate a little bit on the relationship between the civilization crisis and the church. Do you perceive the symptoms of the crisis in the church, for example, at the pastoral efforts to kind of address people on the edge? We could lose clarity of the teaching, for example, teaching of the sins, but also practical questions related, for example, to Christian life, Christian lifestyle that should be distinguishable from the world, and also in the sense of sanctity. So please, if you can provide us with a short commentary. I'll hope I'll manage to be short and brief. And rather than answering specified questions, I'd like maybe I have an opportunity to provide you with a basis that I use as a image to explain problematics of today's current crisis, of spiritual crisis, values crisis, and so on. The first image, I belong to the older generation, but I hope there are people who understand who was Mr. Prašil. In one of his narrative, he says he has had an incident. He has fallen into a mud when he was traveling, and he explained that when I grabbed my hair and I pulled myself out from the mud. Of course, it was a Count Prašil, and his non-logical arguments. Of course, he wasn't able to pull himself out from the mud unless he has a third firm point, what Archimedes was talking about already. And the second image I'm gonna use to portray our society and possible solution is a portrayal from Scouts' life. At night, we usually have a fire with the kids, and one night it was a girls' camp, and it wasn't possible to build a fire, so they just put a gas lamp in the middle, and they started dancing and doing sketches and having fun. And after the first round of the dances, the circle has been moved to it wasn't a circle but more like a potato, and the leader has come and moved the gas lamp to the middle of this new potato thing, and the dancing has continued. And then after the third round of the dancing, the lamp has found itself in a muddy area outside in the mud somewhere. And I addressed the leader and I say, Sylvia, now you showed me a beautiful theological explanation of today's world. After the third round of dancing, you found yourself in the mud and steep area. In the center, you had a lamp in your center, and after a new round of craziness, you moved the lamp somewhere else. So if we had a classical camp with a fire inside, after each dance, we would once again form ourselves into a circle around the live fire. And that's the difference between perceiving our life related to particular values, or whether the center of the values we will move according to our dances. And the third image I'm going to use is an image for maybe move classics. Please forgive me, it's not very clerical, the movie, but it's Die Hard with Bruce Willis in the second part, if you remember. The terrorists attack a airport, and they have some conditions and requests, and they have overpowered a system of navigation systems. And when the airplane is landing, they move the height of the plane, and instead of landing, there's a crash of the plane. And it's connected to a topic I want to talk about: the necessity to address of a stable axis and a center that is not in our hands. It's not stable, and that it is stable, and we could center our lives around it. What is on the negative, on the positive side of the axis. And in fact, what we see today, it's very normal to move the gas lamp in the center of a new potato that is being created, or it's normal to move a axis that is supposed to help the navigation of safe landing. It's nothing else than repeating of the first chapter of Genesis, first temptation that the snake, the demon, has been doing since forever. It's not true what you heard. You will be creators of the good and evil. You will say what is good and evil. Sometimes we say now sometimes we say today that we have rediscovered warm water, and that there's a chaos every time we accept this rule. And without any thinking, we are moving the moral axis. But in fact, it's a human story from its very beginning until the end. And if I was to end it with a spiritual image, the axis is the scripture, and in a form of cross. And the simplest graphic example of the axis, and that gives us the value sense of values. And that's maybe the answers for the smaller questions that you have posed, Jure. Whoever, clericalism, faithful, simple people, are moving further away from this axis, and are basically claiming to have the axis in their own hands, is damaging people and is listening to the old demon, the snake. And any saving step is not in saving ourselves, like the mud thing. But if we are deep in the mud, we need to grasp the helping hand of a savior from above. And thanks to this hand, through this firm point, we can get out of any type of human mud. So maybe a wider answer to those little questions.
Especially film art and music, which are the dominant forms of art today. It seems that the art has been inspired by leftist ideals in recent decades more than conservative ones, although there are some notable exceptions, such as, for example, Mel Gibson or Clint Eastwood, to mention Hollywood production. Why is this case, and is it possible to change it? But first, please, let's comment the introductory lecture.
Thank you for the question and for the invitation. It's my first time at the Bratislava Conservative Forum. Father Kiely, however, is an old ally, I could say. We're both part of NatCon. We meet at international gatherings where we talk about these things and try to figure out who would be willing to organize and act to change things. And I think, therefore, that on the basis of that experience, I can connect the two questions. First of all, with respect to the speech, Father Ben is always impressive, but in this specific case, I would shift the accent slightly in his interpretation of the Maccabees and the revolt. I would say that what we need to worry about now is what does it mean to call an invading force lawless, and what does it mean to say that we, on the other hand, stand for law in our war. Ultimately, law is somehow grounded in God, it's divine law, but primarily it means that on the one hand we have a common standard, and on the other hand we have rules of action. Agreement along those two lines generates the law and the space within which we make decisions, enact decisions, figure out what the consequences are, and adjust from there. Recovering some awareness of law is crucial. My best guess is that this is why, in Western Europe, the law has been largely perverted. It seems like it's just state tyranny holding down a people that is increasingly scared and increasingly rebelling. Probably this means there will be regime change in the next couple of years. In Central Europe, the situation is somewhat different, but even here, it's quite dire. The one advantage Central Europe has over Western Europe is that a political foundation, a reassertion of the essence of law, happened within living memory after 1989, with various stuttering steps. All of these countries, including Slovakia, require new constitutions, new political arrangements, new popular agreements, and elite agreements on the essence of law. And that should make people much more aware of what it means to be in at the founding. What the Father was saying, we have to be in a certain intellectual and spiritual sense radical, not in the sense of burning things down, but in the sense of looking into the roots, figuring out what originally are we. And in Central Europe, we all, I was born and raised in Romania, we all went through this process. And somehow it has already been forgotten. As Professor Legutko said, there is something to be said for how, maybe even starting in the 90s, we began to decay in terms of political thought, and we ended up simply recycling all sorts of crazy things and accepting not the liberal democracy as a paradigm of politics, but instead as an ideology that gradually wipes out the forms of life that we treasure. So probably there were problems at the beginning, but still we have that founding moment. Foundation is the most interesting thing in politics, and is the thing that we need to recover now. And I think this connects to the specific question surrounding culture and pop culture. Music and film, the sounds and the images. Music has this odd quality. If you read 19th century philosophy, as soon as people abandon Enlightenment, they start saying that music is the fundamental thing. Maybe Schopenhauer, maybe Nietzsche, but others as well. Because music affects interior time. Roger Scruton, who was mentioned earlier, also a big fan of music, and unfortunately a Wagner. The music has a power over the people because it does not require a particularly sophisticated intellectual upbringing. You don't have to have gone through 20 years of schooling, but partly because it guarantees to us somehow that we have souls and we are connected to God, that there is something cosmic in the character of music. On the one hand, it's mathematical. On the other hand, you could say it's almost mystical, but certainly emotional. That power of music seems largely to have been abandoned by people on the right. There are various ways of looking at this. One of this is to say that the Catholic Church didn't really appreciate 19th century composers who wrote sacred music. Nobody really cares about Beethoven's Mass or what have you among Catholics. So there's somehow the high resources of European culture were abandoned by a church in retreat in the face of the French Revolution and so on. Another way of looking at this problem of music is to say that the dangerous potential of looking into the human soul seems to have scared people on the right. And they completely abandoned the music to the people who essentially want a revolution. And obvious, especially in the 60s, the revolutionary potential of music, the incitement to lawlessness, it's scared people on the right even more. Actually, it's made people cowards. And that's not an easy problem to solve because, again, music has a popular dimension. You could start thinking about it in terms of a national anthem that makes everybody weep. You can start thinking of it in terms of the things that mothers sing to their infants. So some of these things are emphatically political, some of them are pre-political, but they have an enormous power over the people, and to have abandoned that is to have declared in advance defeat. And that's not a survivable position. The right would simply have to change. Every habit that has gone against this would have to be broken. And if you want to see what that means practically, that would mean that electrification in churches has got to stop and people have to be brought to sing the Mass again. This is a simple test. If you're doing electric amplification of the human voice or the choir in a church, you have lost. It's not fixable. People either sing it or they don't really feel it. I can give more such examples, but I don't want to speak at length. Now, with the case of movies, that is slightly different because movies, unlike music, involve storytelling. The way to think about music would be something like the music of Beethoven is an attempt to give you the inner experience, the emotional dimension of the poetic teaching of Goethe. What does it mean to be German and European? But in that sense, music is dependent for understanding or interpretation on this poetic dimension, on storytelling, on making images in words or indeed on the screen. Movies, again, are just much more popular than poetry. You have to be able to read, to read Ludwig Stur or to read Goethe, and you'd have to read Czechoslovak or you'd have to read German. Movies are available even to illiterates. In that sense, it's the most democratic thing. But it also brings up a fundamental power of recognizing images and considering what is admirable and what is base. What is it that is beautiful? What is it that is right? What is it that is good? We have images of all of these things, and when we see those images, somehow the images in our own souls come alive. And we have to think through what is it about the popular power, even children love images, that connects to wisdom, that connects to an attempt to organize the world, to give an account of being in images. Storytelling has that quality. Unlike our ordinary experience, storytelling has a beginning, middle, and end. It gives you the vision of a complete man, of a complete action, of a complete community. These are the things that we are lacking. These are the things that people on the right should be ambitious for, or else, again, as with the case of music, they give up in advance. If you cannot do the Bildungsroman, the educational stories, they sound like Goethe's Wilhelm Meister. If you cannot tell a political story properly, then you do not have a vision of the complete human being or the complete human community. And if you do not have those things, in fact, you have nothing. You will be always dependent on an increasingly ideological and tyrannical liberal democracy. And so you'll not even be able to represent yourself as a political force or as a spiritual force in that political context, much less take responsibility for the community as a whole. And I would not say the situation is hopeless. In fact, I have made the case for a long time now that the Central Europe especially has developed a counter-cinema of national culture. In the case of, say, Czechoslovakia, that would be director is Jan Hřebejk, whose screenwriter, I think, is Slovak. In Poland, that would be people like the late Andrzej Wajda, watch his movie Katyn, or his last movie, After Image Povidoki. You can see a confrontation in the name of art and patriotism with communism, with totalitarianism. And these are all 21st century movies. There are other directors like that. Agnieszka Holland, also Polish, returned to Poland in her late age from Hollywood. Or Paweł Pawlikowski, another director who made impressive movies about the way totalitarianism leads to nihilism. There are directors like that in Germany. Florian Henkel von Donnersmarck, The Lives of Others, or Never Look Away. Or, on the other hand, Petzold has wonderful movies about totalitarianism as well. The late movies of Konchalovsky in Russia, like Dear Comrades, about the slaughter of student workers in Novocherkassk by the Soviets in the 60s. There's a lot to be said for all of these movies, all of these artists. The question is anybody on the right going to embrace them? Does anybody on the right care about these things, support these artists? Because if not, again, there are no popular visions of the community, of the national community, of the national memory. The things that music and film are supposed to teach everybody and why they are fundamental to the education of children is that they educate memory. They create the first things that are memorable, and some of those images stick with you for your lifetime. Take responsibility for those things or lose. These are the basic alternatives, I would say.
Thank you for your interesting remarks, Mr. Teixeira. I would say you nailed it on the head that when you said that we need to tell our national stories, our historical stories from the conservative point of view, from the point of view of right. But now I will move to the Professor Legutko. Professor Legutko, I will start my question. Of course, you could comment on what Father Kiely said, but the second question is connected to historian Christopher Dawson, who claimed that one of the main reasons we lost Christian culture in Europe was the loss of church education and the rise of state secular education, which according to him effectively pushes Christian faith and culture to the margin of society and of public life. You used to be Minister of Education in Poland, and so maybe it's appropriate to ask you the question, what can we do now with this situation? How is it possible to change? How to learn the new generation the great depths of Christian Western civilization? Is it possible still today? But first, maybe comment the question, the lecture of Father Kiely.
Thank you. I was struck by the accuracy of what Father Kiely said in quoting Christopher Dawson, and in relation to this quotation about art, or I would say about beauty. I mean, for centuries, Christianity and the church they have been inspiration, they have been sponsors. The church was a sponsor, but also patron of art and beauty. If you can make a thought experiment and think of the world without art that was inspired or sponsored, right, by the church in painting, music, architecture, literature, philosophy, then you would see a world that would be aesthetically and intellectually barren, like a desert. So I think one of the problems in our time is that we have got rid of the concept of beauty. Beauty is not something that, though for centuries, right, since antiquity, it was something that the artists aspired to, and at a certain point, beauty ceased to be a major principle. Now, today's art, be it music or painting, beauty is not longer the primary criterion. It's for many it is despised. I don't know what's the theater situation in Slovakia. For many years I was an avid theater goer. A couple of years ago I stopped going to the theater because I discovered it would be hazardous to my health. Right. It's ugliness, right? It's revolting. Mostly crude political message presented in a revolting way. And it's the same message, no matter what is produced, whether it's Shakespeare or some modern guy or Euripides, the message is always the same. So beauty, the beautiful and the sublime, these are things that were sort of the powerful consequence of the church's presence in our life for centuries. And I wish we somehow could go back to it, that the church would rediscover its role. We have a sort of slight symptoms of change for better in my country. For instance, one of the civil society organizations lost initiative, Paint Christmas Anew, and painters who are somehow inspired by Christianity are trying to give it a beautiful rendering, right, of what Christmas stands for. I think this is one of many possibilities, but I think this is a major role to play, because it's not only aesthetic the problem of aesthetics in a sort of vulgar way. It is something that shapes your mind and opens your soul to higher things. Well, for the ancients, the good and the beautiful were synonymous, as we know. Now, education. Well, this is one of those problems that seem impossible to solve, because for many years or decades, what we could see at work was that bad money drives out good money, and bad education is in many respects more attractive than good education. It's attractive to the pupils, the parents, teachers. Good education is something that requires a lot of effort. It may be frustrating. You may fail at the examinations, right? You may have problems. So it's better to lower the standards than to raise the standards. And if you lower the standards, in a course of time, these lower standards will become higher standards, too high, so they have to be lowered again. Well, this requires really a kind of, I would say, national consensus, at least political consensus of the major political forces. Otherwise, education is a political currency, so to speak, right? The political parties compete in which will make a more attractive offer to the public. Well, recently, a lady who is the Minister of Education in my country, an absolutely appalling person, I mean, simply despicable. And so she abolished homework, I mean, no homework for I think, until the, I don't know, 5th grade or 6th grade, no homework at all. And then, well, people say that the parents are not quite happy with it. They say the children are not quite happy with it. But when the homeworks, after she goes away, and I hope she will, when the homeworks will be reinstated, I'm sure there will be some protest, you see. So it's a very tricky subject. Rhetorically, when you talk to people, yes, we want good education, but it comes to practice and concrete measures, they will be against it. Some say, and I tend to agree with it, that all good schools were established not in a democratic society, but in an aristocratic society, because a school is essentially an aristocratic institution. And if you want to have a good school in a democratic society, that becomes a problem. Those who thought that when the communists fell, we would have the flourishing of good schools were disappointed. It was one of the failures of this new liberal order that emerged after the fall of the old regime. So I think that democracy and good education, well, do not see eye to eye, if I may say so, which does not, of course, free us from making every effort to improve the schools. Nowadays, the level of education is impossibly low. I mean, the ignorance which you encounter when you are a teacher is mind-boggling. You don't think it's possible to be so ignorant. Well, it is possible, yeah, and more so sooner, unfortunately. So yes, this is one of the urgent problems that have to be solved. But as I said, it would require a kind of political consensus. No partisan politicking over education. If miraculously that can happen, we can do something about it. And another obstacle, and I will finish on that, is that the European Union, that institution which created a lot of damage, decided to meddle in the education too, and they came up with what they call the European area of education or something like that, which is of course totally against the treaties. I mean, this is not within the competence of the EU, but as you know, it doesn't matter, because what is or is not a prerogative of the EU, it is the EU that decide. So that would be a further deterioration. Once they put the hand on schools, you won't expect more awful things to happen, which is another argument to leave this institution and try to solve our problems within the means that we have.
So, with rather doom perspectives on education in democracies, I open the discussion for public. So if you have questions, please raise your hand and we will send a microphone to you. We have maybe time for 1-2 questions, so don't hesitate too long. Je možnosť položiť otázku aj v slovenčine, ak by niekto chcel. A máme prvú ruku hore. Nech sa páči pán v druhej rade. Please introduce
The possibility to ask a question in Slovak as well. And there is one hand up. There is Mr. in the second row. Please, prosím, please. My name is Ladislav Gabčo. I'm a guest here, a participant. What we have repeated a few times during the discussion is something we call eternal truth. So something we don't doubt at all, and that has become relative. And today, current progressive part of the spectrum talks about the truth is changing. Truth is this because we agreed it to be the truth. There is a different situation in the society, and then a new truth will come. In between what you were, I remember Nietzsche talking about we killed God. How will we know what is up and what is down? So it's 200 years old. And my question is that it's nothing new. It's basically an old thing to stop distinguishing between what is real truth and to follow it. Whether there is any philosophical or different reaction in today's world, in modern or postmodern philosophy, that would react to it with serious arguments. I understand that historically, art and music, Dostoevsky was saying that the beauty will save us. But is there a serious philosophical knowledge that the eternal truth should not be ignored? There is a philosopher, so Mr. Legutko.
Relativism of truth of today.
Whether there are any philosophical arguments against the eternal truth, right? You said
against relativism of truth. Relativism in matters of truth.
Well, the problem of today's philosophy, as far as I know today's philosophy, is that the truth has become a sort of social, contextual category, and even in the disciplines where one would think that the absolute nature of truth cannot be disputed, like mathematics, the arguments to the effect that behind it there is some kind of agenda, right? That mathematics is essentially white supremacist, or it's male chauvinist. So this is not a philosophical argument. But this is the argument that results from what once was called, right, the philosophy of suspicion. If you do not treat the statements on the philosophical propositions as assessed or evaluated by the categories of truth and falsehood, you seek a hidden agenda by those who utter it, and you cannot really find an argument to refute this approach, because this approach does not accept the argument at its face value. You see, so. Essentially, I would say that modern philosophy is anti-philosophical to the extent that it accepts this philosophy of suspicion, that does not analyze for what they are on the merit, but on what conditions the minds of those who formulated these arguments, whether it's a white man or black woman or, well, a lesbian or, well, whatever, right? So this is anti-philosophical. There cannot be any exchange of views or refutation or corroboration. It's just two tracks. The one is philosophical and the other is anti-philosophical. For those who reject philosophy and who say that what matters is the agenda of those who utter the arguments, the solution is power, that if we win, then we will impose our point of view. Well, black people win and we impose our point of view. The homosexual people, we win, so we impose our perspective, we impose our agenda, we introduce it into university curricula, in well, political programs, and so on and so forth. So that would be my answer. If you seek some kind of refutation of that kind of relatives, you will not find it, because the refutation will not be accepted by the other side. They're not interested in their ideas being refuted. They're interested in their ideas being enforced on others. I don't know if that answers your question, but I try to answer it as well as I could.
I see lady in the middle on the right hand.
Thank you very much for this interesting panel. I'm Ellen Fantini, an editor of the European Conservative magazine. And one of our goals is to point visually in our pages to beauty and our patrimony through the visual arts and the treasures of the West. And thinking about how we return to the spiritual and cultural foundations of Europe, I think very much about young people, and conferences like yesterday's law conference are very, very important, and the youth political movements are very important. But how do we get conservative young people into the arts, to become sculptors and artists and writers, writers of fiction, for example? How do we reclaim the cultural foundations when young people are, anyone who wants to, for example, become a visual artist or an actor or enter the cultural realm is instantly canceled the minute he outs himself as conservative. So do we build parallel structures? How do we get support for these parallel structures? Because of course we do have to reclaim the culture, and not just with armies of young lawyers, although armies of young lawyers is important, but we need visual artists, we need actors, we need writers. So how do we do that? How do we attract people when they're instantly confronted with cancel culture before they even start?
We understand, so Mr. Teixeira, please shortly, because we are running out of time.
Thanks for the question, Ellen. Unfortunately, we're about to wrap up the panel, so I can only say something very briefly. All human things pertain either to war or to peace. If you're looking for a peaceful solution, it's something along the lines of what Professor Legutko was saying. The church used to not just inspire and censor, but also to support or patronize. The question is money. The question is honor. Is anybody going to be paid to sculpt? Is anybody going to be paid to paint? And if you don't have a lot of money, all you can say is your sculpture will be in an impressive church and it'll be there centuries. It's for eternity, maybe. It's order to God. If you can do that, you have a peaceful solution. If people don't have the courage to do that, they're lost. There's another solution, and that is war. Younger people are simply less interested in being censored or, as they say, canceled. They're just savage. It's very hard for conservatives or even right-wing people to accept that, but that is the truth. And therefore, scandal can appeal to them. The threat of cancellation for being so shocking as to think that maybe 100 or 1,000 years ago people found the truth, it's actually much easier now than it was 35 years ago when everybody wanted to be on the right side of history and at the same time, therefore, fashionable. You can be scandalous now. There's great careers to be made in scandal. So there is a warlike solution. There are people who can make art that will shock people and inspire people.
We are running out of time, but maybe Father Kiely would add final remark.
Thank you. Well, I'm a plant. Ellen asked the question just so I could respond because I write for the European Conservative as well. But yes, everything Titus said and what I said, the professor said, that the church must be both, just repeating what he said, money, obviously, but yes, parallel institutions. We think in America of some of the new colleges. There are all kinds of wonderful things happening in the United States, and I'm sure in Europe as well, although I think in a much smaller degree. But we do have to build parallel solutions. There's a little bit of what Drea was talking about in terms of the Benedict option, not running for the hills, but creating parallel institutions and money. Catholic, Christian sponsorship from the church, but also where are the Catholic millionaires and billionaires sponsoring beautiful buildings, churches, etc., etc.? There are again in the United States, but it's time to call some of our Catholic people with money to not just give to academic institutions, but to artistic institutions.
So if you are Catholic millionaires in audience, please listen to these words. And final remarks, Archbishop Vasil.
Opäť sa uchýlim možno v pokuse o doplnenie týchto odpovedí k skúsenosti. V minulosti bolo považované za vrchol umenia byť inovatívnym, byť šokujúcim. A viedlo to k
I'll maybe try to complete these answers. Experience. In the past, it was considered the top of art to be innovative, to be shocking. And it led to fragmentation and decomposition of any canons of art. We cannot speak of any style. Style is anything we consider art. And a small experience in the area of music and visual interpretation in the cathedral in Košice is found across from the street. There is a huge underground club, Colosseum, known as Alternative Center. I'm not sure what's going on there, but there are various concerts for young people from the whole Europe, hard rock, metal, thrash metal, and so on and so on. And at the same time, there is cathedral choir that I could humbly say is one of the best in Central Europe, that sings classical Byzantine music, that is raising human voice in harmony as the highest form of spirit that a person can address God with. And within 100 yards, there is cultural expression, extreme expression. Ave Satan, who spray, Ave Satan on my cathedral. And sometimes when I walk around in my clothing, I meet similarly clothed young people with a slightly different hairstyle. I have short hairstyle, they have different hairstyle. I have a normal cross, they usually have other reverted cross. So that's an oppositum that expresses itself in this. It's interesting that our youth a choir, there are young people also interested in singing in it. And they are coming to 4-hour liturgy of canon of Andrej Kretsky that we rediscovered in the liturgy. There is a long prayer of psalms from the 8th century. And they don't feel the need to be shocking, because they are shocking by this, actually, of rediscovering the beauty and the spiritual sense. And at the walls of the cathedral, there is the graffitis that I mentioned before, and at the same time I have young people who study in Rome at the Accademia delle Belle Arti. They're devoted to iconography, and they have discovered something canonical, something giving person a sense of form and a depth of sense. And that's maybe the way of beauty. Because you said that beauty can save the world, right? Dostoevsky, of course, but and it can serve the sense of harmony, beauty that searches its sense in the original founder of the harmony. And apart from all the pragmatical things, because of course we need institutions, money, sponsors, sometimes the power alone of beauty can be strong enough to attract others. We're running